So we're continuing our discussion with categorical distributions. So we talked about the two types of graphs that we use for categorical distributions. Now I want to talk about how we describe the graphs and how we're going to make comparisons between categorical distributions by looking at the graphs. So summarizing categorical distributions is the name of section 2.4. And it says at the top, since categorical data has no inherent order, so that's the blank here, no inherent order, these measures of, or the measures of shape, remember with so let me back up, I'm talking about numerical distributions. Remember for numerical distributions, we describe them in terms of shape, center, and spread. That's what we use for numerical distributions. So since categorical data has no inherent order, shape, center, and spread do not appropriately describe categorical data. Instead, we're going to use two descriptions, and one is called the mode, which represents the typical or the most frequent outcome for whatever the categories are, and the variability. So variability is similar to what it meant with categorical or numerical data, how spread out the data is. And for us, we're going to talk about it in terms of the diversity of outcomes. More categories in your responses means more variability. So let's start with mode. So mode represents, when we talk about categorical data, it's the category that occurs most frequently. You've probably heard that description before. Mode, most, sounds similar. So the category that occurs most frequently. Modes for numerical and categorical data. With numerical, the peaks did not have to be the same height. Remember, we called that mode. We had unimodal or bimodal. However, with categorical data, the modes must be roughly the same height. Okay, so that's one difference there. Let's take a look at an example. It says a fake survey asked a random sample of college students what their predominant activity was during the winter break. So if you take a look at the graph, we had 4 responses from students. They either said visiting family, sports, shopping, or none. The order these are in does not make a difference, remember, because you're talking about categorical data. But these were the 4 responses students gave. So the part A says, what is the typical response? Typical, we can think of that as our mode. Same idea. The easiest way to tell with this is where is the highest bar, and you can see that would be visiting family. So a typical response for students in this survey was that they were visiting family. What is this called? Of course, this is called the mode. All right. If we had another category that was close to visiting family in height, let's say shopping was close, maybe not exactly the same height, but relatively close. Let's say the shopping bar had gone up there, then we would have had 2 modes. We would have said shopping and visiting family and would have been bimodal data. But it didn't, let me get rid of that, it didn't have anything else that came close to it. So visiting family was clearly the mode for this data. The second description we're going to use for categorical data is the variability. So the best way to think about that when you're talking about categorical data is the diversity. So the diversity in the data values. So the more answers students gave, the more options they had, the more responses they had in different categories, that meant you had more variability. So a graph with high variation, so high variation means that you've got lots of diversity in categories. So you can think of this as more categories. That means you've got data that's high variability. Less diversity in categories, so fewer categories would mean you have low variation. And so that would be fewer categories in general. All right, so let's look at an example here. So it says, remark, variability here is more about the occurrence of many different categories. So the occurrence of many categories rather than the frequency. I'm going to abbreviate and say categories, rather than the frequency of each category. So take a look at this example. And a lot of times we're going to be looking at graphs and comparing. It's hard to give a number. We don't have a number we can give necessarily for variability. and we're talking about categorical data, but we can look at graphs and make a comparison. So this is according to Florida's DOE accountability reports. The bar charts below show the ethnic composition by percentage of 2 schools in Duval County for the 2014-2015 school year. So we've got school A over here, and we've got school B over here. Notice these are bar charts, and they're given in frequencies, so we can see the frequencies. I don't know if these are hundreds or thousands or how these are measured, but that's okay. We'll go with what they've got. So they both have the same number of categories. So what I want you to think about, though, is which school appears to have greater variability in ethnicity. So what you want to look at, now they do have the same number of categories, but what you want to look at, which graph looks like it has more people in more categories? And take a minute and think about that. I would say that it's probably school A, because if you look at school A, we've got more people in more categories. If I look over here, we've got fewer people in these categories. So we've got fewer Asians and fewer others. So I would say school A. So let's write that out. So school A has more students in more categories. It could even be said too, if you were to look at the mode, how many modes does school A have compared to school B? That's another way to think about it. If you'll notice at school A, we've got two bars. Let me erase some stuff here. In school A, we've got 2 bars that I would say are relatively similar in height. We've got this category here and this category here. They're close. They're only off by about 5 students. So school A, we could also say is bimodal, or has 2 modes, versus school B, which only has 1 bar that's far above the rest. So school B has 1 mode. We can see that right there. So when you're talking about categorical data, the things we're going to describe it in terms of are going to be the mode and the variability.